Today we're going to be replacing the soft factory rubber bushings that are in the calipers with these brass bushings to improve our brake feel. So if you're familiar with any BMW product, they all have these rubber bushings in the caliper for the guide pins, and they use this clip right here to hold the caliper in place so that everything stays in position. And what this is going to allow is some flex within the caliper when you're applying brake pressure, because as that brake clamps down on the rotor is twisting forward, the brake caliper is gripped onto it, and it can move a little bit, which is going to absorb a little bit of that braking force. It's going to dull your brake application a little bit at the cost of having a much quieter brake caliper and a brake caliper that's not quite so grabby. So it is more luxurious, but it's not quite as sporty. Now, the other benefit it has is with these caps back here and these bushings holding everything in place, you can grease these and you can pretty much leave them. The maintenance on them is pretty low. Most people don't even know it's a problem. Your calipers can stick if you run out of grease, but it's usually not an issue in most applications. Now, these brass bushings go in the same spot that these rubber bushings do. They are held in place by these snap rings, so you're going to need a set of snap ring pliers to get these in. I can promise you don't want to try it without them. So the advantages offered by these brass bushings is pretty straightforward. It's holding your caliper more rigidly, so it's not able to flex the same way that the rubber will. So it's going to give you a little bit better brake feel. You're going to have a little bit more braking capability, like ever so slightly, but the biggest thing is going to be feel. And the price for that is you're going to have to service your calipers a little bit more often to reapply grease, because this is open to the environment, so it can get washed away. You can get grime in there. The reason I'm using these specific bushings is because they were cheap. It was $50 for a set for the front and $50 for a set for the back. The calipers on R53 will not be there very long. I'm going to be upgrading to the R56 calipers in the front soon, and I'm also going to be replacing the rears, which is the factory rebuild, just so that I have a completely fresh and ready to go braking system. ECS Tuning makes a much better product. Instead of sliding through here and using a snap ring, it is a interference fit, which I think is a much better idea. So you have absolutely zero slop. You don't have to have super tight tolerances. Everything is as tight as it can possibly get. And it also looks very similar to this factory rubber piece. So it has a little bit of extra over here, and you have a cap as well, so you can grease these. They're safe from the environment. You should have a pretty similar service interval between the ECS Tuning bushings and these factory rubber ones. So I think those are a much better product, and that's what I'll be putting on the E60. That's what I'm going to be putting on the R53 once I upgrade the calipers. So these are just to try it out and see what it's like, and go ahead and make a video about it, get a little bit of experience, get a little bit of feedback from you guys, and then we'll be using that superior design in the future. The only tools you're going to need for this is a snap ring pliers. You're going to need some sort of screwdriver to pry this little clip up here off, and you're going to need a 5mm Allen key, preferably one that is a socket, so that you can torque these back down. These are going to be torqued to 22 foot-pounds. If you do take the whole caliper bracket off, the front brackets are torqued to 80 foot-pounds and the rear brackets are torqued to 50 foot-pounds, but it's not necessary to remove the bracket. You just need to remove the caliper portion. So the first thing we're going to do now that we've got the wheel off is we're going to use a screwdriver to pry this clamp out and get this out of the way. I really don't like these clips because, for example, on my wife's E70 X5M, I went through, painted the calipers, looked everything nice, and then trying to put this clip back on, I scratched the caliper that I had literally just painted, so that was a little frustrating. So this will eliminate the need for this and make the front of the caliper look a little bit cleaner, in my opinion. Next, we'll remove these little dust covers that are on the back of the factory bushings. You can then use your 5mm Allen key, place it in there, and these shouldn't be too difficult to break loose. I've got about a foot worth of extension here, and it should break loose pretty easily. So now that we've got both pins backed all the way out, if you don't have a lip on your rotor, you should be able to slide this off pretty easily and get access to the back of the caliper. So with the caliper rested up here on the bracket, you can see where these bushings are right here. So we've got one here and one down here. So these are where the guide pins go through and are allowing the flex. So you can pretty easily pry these out with a screwdriver, and then we can place in our new bushings. You will have to remove both brake pads to get access. So now that we've got both bushings out, what we're going to do is we're going to clean out these two holes here. So we want to make sure that we don't have a lot of debris in here, to make sure that the bushings sit in nice and flush and they sit in without any sort of cant to them. We don't want them at an angle. Make sure you do not let the caliper hang by the brake line. That's going to put stress on it, and you don't want those going bad, obviously. So we want to make sure that we have somewhere for these to rest so we're not putting pressure on the brake line. So now that our caliper has been cleaned, we're going to take our brass bushing here. You can see we have the side for the snap ring, and then we have this little ledge here where we're going to use that collar for is to keep it in place. So it should slide right in without any resistance. Now what you want to do is you can apply a small amount of high temperature grease to the outside of the brass bushing, but the more important part is to make sure you have a little bit of grease on the slide pin. So once I install the slide pin, right before I do that, I'll put a little grease in here and then put my slide pin through. Now that we've got it in place, we're going to be using our snap ring here and a set of snap ring pliers that are going to spread out the ring so it can fit over the area and then slide into its groove. So spread it out with the tool. You don't want to spread it too far, it could break. We've got it in the groove here. Remove the tool out, and now this can't pop out of place. It is held into the caliper. So we'll do that on the other hole, and then we can put everything back in place. So like I said earlier, we no longer need this clip because the caliper does not slide up and down anymore. It is solidly mounted. So I actually have already driven around on the car with these in. I went ahead, installed them, drove around, got an impression, figured out if I liked them or not, and then went ahead and just reversed it so I could video it for you guys. The whole process of this install is super easy, especially if you're already replacing your brake pads or your rotors and you're already in here. It'll take you an extra 5 minutes total to do all four. I mean, just pop everything out, slide it back in. You're already doing most of that hardware anyway. So it's a very, very easy install. Like I said, it's only $100. So if you're doing a tracked build and you're not going to be driving the car on the street a lot, great option for these open ones. I would still recommend the ECS Tuning ones. They're a little bit more expensive because it is a nicer part, but I think it's also a better part, and I think it's worth it, especially if you're driving on the street, so that you can maintain the grease on those pins. So it looks more like this. Like I said, I put a picture up of it earlier, but you got this extra area up here holding grease in. You've got a cap on it so that it's not going to let any of the weather in. It's a much better design. But driving impressions with these on is it does not make any sort of night and day difference. You're not going to 100% transform your brakes. However, the pedal did feel a little bit better. I think the biggest change you can make for your Mini is if you did all this at one time. So you did the brake lines, you did better pads, you did better rotors, you did better fluid, make sure everything was bled properly, and threw those bushings in there. I think you would really transform how your brake pedal feels. Versus now, I've already done a lot of the other upgrades, so just adding one little bit to it, I'm not going to feel it as much, but I do think it is going to help, and I think is a worthwhile upgrade, especially because with those rubber bushings, as they get more worn out, the caliper starts to twist, you'll get some uneven pad wear, so it would help save a pair of pads. If it saves one pair of pads, it's totally worth it. And like I said earlier, I think it makes the caliper look much better by not having this clip in front, especially if your calipers are painted. You're going to save that painted finish for a little bit longer. So while it is not a complete night and day difference, I do think the brake pedal feels a little bit better, and the minor inconvenience of having to grease the pins every now and again is a pretty low cost to pay for me right now. So of course, if you guys have any questions about adding these bushings to your Mini, or you have any comments, of course feel free to leave those below. Hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys